The British Empire was in many ways a force for good. Nearly everywhere it occupied, it raised the standard of living, developed infrastructure, spread Christianity, and promoted education all around the world. It also single-handedly ended slavery for much of the world, including in the territories the empire controlled. While Great Britain had been a global power ever since the early 17th century, it wasn't until Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815 that Great Britain truly emerged as the dominant world power, and by eliminating France from the world stage, Britain was left without a serious competitor. The century following Napoleon's defeat is sometimes called the Pax Britannica, meaning British peace because of the relative prosperity and peace in Europe during this time. The presence of a single world power created stability and kept conflicts to a minimum. But it wasn't just peace that Great Britain had, but rather its unmatched navy is what really helped maintain its dominance. The British Royal Navy was roughly twice the size of the next largest navy, being the United States. And even though their ships weren't vastly superior to others, their sailors were at sea more often, which made them more experienced, and therefore making them by far some of the best sailors in the world. To add to that, British ships controlled most of the key trade routes in Asia, North America, and Africa, allowing its merchants and traders an overwhelming advantage, and allowed Great Britain to become incredibly rich off of sea power. But Britain didn't use its naval supremacy merely to enrich itself. Instead, its navy not only safeguarded British interests, but also contributed to global stability. A notable example of this was its role on the front lines of the darkest episodes in Western history, the slave trade. Decades before the American Civil War and the 13th Amendment that ended slavery in the United States, Britain passed two anti-slavery laws. The Slave Trade Act of 1807, which banned the slave trade around the empire, and the Slavery Abolition Act of 1838, which officially made it illegal to own slaves completely. And to properly enforce this legislation, they utilized their strong navy, and any ship captains who were caught transporting slaves were subject to fines. But soon the Royal Navy declared all perpetrators of slave trading to be treated the same as pirates, and the punishment for piracy was death. Great Britain's ships were the global policemen in the 19th century, and along the west coast of Africa, these ships became highly successful in capturing slave ships and freeing slaves, and eventually declared war on the African slave trade in a move called the Blockade of Africa. In 1808, a fleet called the West Africa Squadron was formed to patrol the African coast and catch slave ships. In the following decades, they seized an estimated 1,600 slave ships and freed over 150,000 African slaves. African kingdoms were also encouraged to sign anti-slavery treaties, and over 50 African rulers signed them, and for the ones that didn't, corrective action was taken. One example was the deposition of Oba Kosoko of Lagos, Nigeria in 1851. After refusing to sign an anti-slavery treaty, the HMS Bloodhound and HMS Tartar besieged Lagos and deposed Kosoko, and was quickly replaced with an anti-slavery rival named Akitoy. And while some illegal trade continued in far-off regions, by the middle of the 19th century, the Atlantic slave trade was almost completely eradicated. But unfortunately, slavery outside the empire's jurisdiction would continue for hundreds of years in other places. No nation on earth did more to eliminate slavery from the world than the British Empire. And although empires are often viewed as inherently tyrannical, Britain's war on slavery shows that immense power can in some cases be channeled for immense good.